I had a stroke on a Wednesday morning, and my son didn't find out until his wife mentioned it at dinner 3 days later. I want you to think about that for a second. Not hours. Days, 3 of them. I was lying in a hospital bed in the ICU at Mercy General with the left side of my face drooping, and my right hand not quite doing what my brain told it to do, and the person I had raised from the day he came into this world. The person I had stayed up with through ear infections and nightmares and a broken collarbone from a bicycle accident in 1987. Didn't know. Not because no one called him, because his wife, Christy, decided to wait until it was convenient to mention it. My name is Lorraine. I'm 54 years old. And this is the story of how I learned, in a way I will never be able to unlearn, exactly what I mean to the people who were supposed to love me, and how I eventually made sure they understood exactly what that lesson cost them. It started on a Wednesday. I remember because I had just put a load of laundry in before breakfast. I'm very particular about laundry days. Always have been. Wednesdays and Sundays. And I was standing at the kitchen counter making my coffee when something just stopped working right. That's the only way I can describe it. Half of me stopped being mine. I remember reaching for the counter and not quite finding it, and then I remember the floor. My neighbor Agnes found me. She's in her 70s and she lives 2 houses down, and she checks on me most mornings, because we have a coffee habit and she knows I never miss it. She called 911. She rode in the ambulance with me. She held my hand in the emergency room while they ran every test known to medicine, and she sat in that plastic waiting room chair for 4 hours, until they told her I'd had an ischemic stroke and that they were moving me to the ICU for monitoring. Agnes. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not my grandchildren who live 40 minutes away. Agnes, who has known me for 11 years and who once borrowed my hedge trimmer and returned it with a bow on it and a plate of oatmeal cookies by way of apology. My son's name is Derek. He's 31. He married Christy 4 years ago and they have 2 kids, Maisie and Owen. And before you ask, yes, I'm aware Owen is on the list, and no, the child is real and he is my actual grandchild, and this is his actual name in this actual story of my actual life. They live in Millbrook, which is 40 minutes from my house. 40 minutes. I have driven that distance to bring them soup when Maisie had a stomach bug. I have driven it in January with snow on the ground to babysit so Christy could go to a spa day with her sister. 40 minutes, which I mention only because it will become relevant shortly in a way that will make your jaw tighten. I also have a daughter, Becca. She lives in Phoenix, which is, yes, far. I'm not going to pretend geography isn't a factor. But Phoenix has airports. Phoenix has phones. Phones have always worked fine between Phoenix and here as far as I'm aware. Agnes called Derek from her cell phone from the waiting room. She told me this later. She said he picked up. She told him what happened, told him where I was, and he said, and I'm quoting Agnes because she has a very good memory and she was angry enough about it, that she wrote it down. Oh God. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. We'll figure out next steps. We'll figure out next steps. I am his mother. I had a stroke. I was in the ICU. Next steps. Agnes stayed with me until visiting hours ended that first night. She brought me a crossword book from the gift shop downstairs even though my hand wasn't working right yet, just so I'd have something to look at. She told me Derek had said they'd figure it out. I asked her what that meant. She didn't have an answer. He didn't come that day. He didn't come the next day either. On day 2 I got a text, "Hey Mom. Agnes told us what happened. So sorry. How are you feeling? Is the hospital treating you okay?" That was it. Nothing about coming, nothing about when. Just, how are you feeling with a period at the end instead of a question mark, which I noticed, which tells you something about the state of my mind even post-stroke. I was lying there analyzing punctuation. Becca called on day 2. That I'll give her. She called and she cried and she said, "Mom, I'm coming." And I said, "Don't come." I meant it. I didn't want her to spend money on a last-minute flight. I was stable. She argued with me for 20 minutes. I won the argument. I want to be honest about that. I told Becca not to come. What I did not do was tell Derek not to come. Derek was not offered that choice. The hospital was 40 minutes from his house. He did not come on day 1, day 2, or day 3. On day 3 I found out why, in the least satisfying way imaginable. My occupational therapist, a wonderful young woman named Jo who was helping me relearn how to grip things properly, mentioned in passing that she'd had a long weekend and gone to a wine festival in the valley. And something in me, some quiet awful instinct, made me ask which wine festival. And she named it. And I knew immediately that it was the same one Christy had been talking about for 2 months. I had heard Christy mention that wine festival in September-October, and again at Thanksgiving. She'd been planning it with her friends. I hadn't thought about it since. I didn't connect it until Joe mentioned it. And then the arithmetic was very simple and very cold. Derek didn't come to the hospital in the first 3 days because he and Christy went to a wine festival that weekend. I lay in that hospital bed and I did the math over and over, trying to find a different answer. Agnes called on a Wednesday. The festival was Thursday through Saturday. Derek texted on Thursday. He did not visit until Sunday, when I had been in the hospital for 4 days and had been moved out of the ICU and into a regular room, and he arrived with Christy and a balloon that said, "Get well soon," in cheerful yellow letters, and he hugged me and said, "You look great, Mom. Color's good." I looked great. After 4 days in the hospital recovering from a stroke. My face was still slightly uneven when I smiled. I had a grip strength of about 40% in my right hand. I looked great. They stayed for an hour and 15 minutes. I know because I watched the clock with a particular stillness that I think is a new feature of who I am now. Christy talked for most of it. About the wine festival, about Maisie's dance recital coming up, about a renovation they were thinking about doing to their guest bathroom. Derek nodded and occasionally patted my arm and said things like, "The important thing is you're getting better." He didn't ask what my recovery would look like. He didn't ask what I would need when I got home. He didn't ask if I was scared, which I was deeply, in a way that kept me awake at 2 a.m. listening to the machines and thinking about the laundry I'd left in the washer that was probably ruined by now. He did ask, before they left, whether I still had the patio furniture he'd stored in my garage 2 summers ago, because Christy wanted to use it again now that they were redoing the back deck. Agnes took me home when I was discharged on day 8. She had checked on my house, found the laundry, run it through the dryer, and left a casserole in the refrigerator with a note that said, "Heat at 350, don't argue." She helped me up the front steps because my balance was still unreliable, and she sat with me for 2 hours just to make sure I was settled. She asked if she could call anyone. I told her there was no one to call. That night, alone in my house that smelled like someone else's casserole, and the ghost of the laundry I'd almost been doing when my brain decided to malfunction, I made myself a promise. I had spent 54 years being the person who showed up. I showed up for Derek's every school play, every science fair, every humiliating little league game where he struck out 4 times and cried in the parking lot after. I showed up for Christy's baby showers, and her mother's funeral and their kitchen renovation, when they needed someone to watch the kids for a week. I showed up, reliably, without being asked twice, because that is what you do when you love someone. I promised myself that, the next time someone in my family needed something from me, I was going to let myself feel the full weight of the question before I answered it. I didn't have to wait long, 6 weeks after I came home from the hospital. And I counted because I had gotten into the habit of counting things, the way you do when you're trying to document something, even if you don't know yet what you'll do with the documentation. My phone rang. Derek, which was notable because Derek almost exclusively texted. "Hey Mom," he said, voice bright and careful in the way it gets when he wants something. "So Christy and I have been talking, and we're thinking of doing a big anniversary party. 5 years in March. We'd love to do it at your place since you have the yard and the space and, you know, it's more personal. We're thinking maybe 80 guests? Christy's already found a caterer, we'd cover that obviously. We'd just need you to coordinate the setup, manage the vendors on the day, basically run point since it's your house. 80 guests. At my house 6 weeks after a stroke." He wanted me to manage vendors. I didn't say anything for a moment. I held the phone and I let the silence exist. "Mom? You still there?" "I'm here," I said. "I'm just thinking. It would be a Saturday in March," he said helpfully. "Plenty of time to plan. And obviously we'd help." "Derek," I said, "when was the last to ask me how my hand was doing?" A pause. "What? My right hand, the one I was doing occupational therapy on for 6 weeks. When did you last ask about it?" Another pause, longer. I mean I figured if something was wrong you would have. I would told you," I finished. "Right, like I told you I was in the ICU and you figured out your next steps." He was quiet. I'll think about the party, I said. I'll let you know, and I hung up. And I sat with it for 3 days. Here's what I knew about Derek's relationship with me, rationally and without the fog of wanting it to be different. I was useful. I had always been useful. I babysat without being asked. I lent money I wasn't always paid back. I drove to Millbrook in snowstorms and heat waves, and once during a nor'easter because Christy's sister was having a crisis, and Christy needed to go and some needed to be with the kids. I was a resource, and resources when they break down are inconvenient. You manage them, you check in sporadically. You send a balloon and ask about the patio furniture. So I thought about what Derek actually deserved as an answer to his request, and then I called him back. I can do the party, I said when he picked up. He sounded genuinely relieved. Mom, that's great, on one condition, I said. I need you to come over this week, not to plan the party, just to sit with me for an afternoon, the way I used to sit with you when things were hard. Think you can do that? There was a pause I recognized. It was the pause of someone doing inconvenient math. This week's a little busy, he said. Christy has her thing on Thursday and Friday I have that work. That's fine, I said very calmly. Then I won't be able to do the party. I have a lot of recovery still ahead and I need to be thoughtful about my energy. He said he'd call me back. He didn't call back that day. He texted the next morning. Christy thinks we should just look at venues. Probably easier anyway. I read it twice. I actually smiled a little, but not a happy smile. The kind of smile that means something finally makes complete sense. And I started doing something I had never done before in my life. I started saying no. Over the next 2 weeks, I declined to watch Maisie when Christy had a last-minute conflict. I said I was still managing my recovery, and my energy was limited. I didn't offer an alternative. I declined to loan Derek my truck for a furniture pickup. I said I needed it available in case of a medical situation. I didn't explain further. Both times, I was pleasant. Calm, completely without drama or visible resentment. Just know, I want to be clear that I felt terrible about Maisie. She's 8, and none of this is her fault, and I miss her constantly. But I had realized something about the way I had arranged my life. I had made myself so continuously, cheerfully available that no one had ever been forced to examine what they would do if I weren't. I had absorbed every inconvenience so smoothly that the people who depended on me had actually forgotten that I was a person who could be inconvenienced. My instinct was correct, but my execution needed more information. Because what happened next caught me completely off guard. I had a follow-up appointment with my neurologist in February, about 3 months after the stroke. His office was 40 minutes from my other direction. I had been driving short distances for about a month, and I was nervous about the highway. I hadn't told Derek about the appointment. I hadn't told anyone except Agnes, who had offered to drive me and whom I had thanked and declined because I was trying to do hard things. I was in the waiting room when I ran into my sister-in-law Faye, my late husband's sister. We'd stayed close after Ray passed 6 years ago. Not as close as we once were, but she still called on birthdays, and we had lunch twice a year. I was genuinely happy to see her. We talked for a few minutes, catching up, and then she said something that I felt in my chest in a very specific way. I'm glad you're here actually, she said. I've been meaning to call. I was a little worried after what Derek told the family. I looked at her. What Derek told the family? She must have seen some change in my face because she became careful. He mentioned you'd had some kind of health scare in the fall, but he said you were fine, and that you specifically said you didn't want to fuss. That you'd asked everyone to give you space to recover privately. I asked for space to recover privately. I had said no such thing. I had said nothing about space. I had lain in a hospital bed for 8 days watching my neighbor bring me crossword books, and hoping my son would walk through the door. I had said nothing about privacy. I had, in fact, cried twice to the night shift nurse, a man named Gerald who had the particular quality of being willing to just sit with someone without filling the silence. Because I couldn't sleep, and I was frightened and I had no one. Derek had told the extended family I'd asked for space. I sat with Faye in that waiting room, and I felt the whole shape of it rearrange in front of me. He hadn't dressed in absent. He had dressed his absence. He had taken his failure to show up and repackaged it as my preference, my choice, my desire for solitude, so that nobody in the family would ask where he'd been. He'd done to me exactly what I now understood. He'd made the empty chair next to my hospital bed look like it was empty because I'd put a reserved sign on it. Faye was watching me. I never said that, I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. What? I never asked for space. I never told Derek or anyone else that I didn't want visitors. I was in the ICU for 2 days and then a regular room for 6 more. The chair next to my bed was empty the entire time, except when Agnes sat in. Faye looked stricken. I had no idea, she said. I assumed. He made it sound like you were very clear about it. Your privacy, your words. My neighbor took me home, I said. My neighbor sat with me in the hospital and brought me a casserole and ran my laundry. My son went to a wine festival. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, Lorraine, I'm so sorry. I asked her, and I want to be clear that I asked her gently. Not as a weapon, just because I needed to understand the full picture. Whether she might be willing to tell me what else had been communicated to the family about my recovery. She was reluctant, and I understood that. But she also has a conscience the size of a small building. And eventually she told me. Derek had sent a message to the family group text, the one I had never been added to, because I had expressed to Ray once that I found group texts overwhelming. And Derek had apparently taken that as a permanent position. Sometime in the first week of my hospitalization, he'd said I was recovering well, resting, that I'd been very specific about wanting quiet, and that the best thing everyone could do was give me room. He'd said he was staying in close contact and would keep everyone posted if anything changed. Staying in close contact. He had texted me twice. There were other messages in that thread over the following weeks. A cousin asking if I needed anything. Derek saying I was doing great and was very focused on my recovery routine. Faye mentioning she'd like to send flowers. Derek suggesting a card might be better since I was keeping things low-key. An aunt asking if she could visit. Derek saying I wasn't quite up for company yet. He had managed the entire narrative. Every offer of help, redirected. Every impulse toward me, absorbed by a story he'd constructed so that he could go on with his wine festivals and his back deck renovations, and his guest bathroom without a single person in the family, looking at him and asking the obvious question. I sat in my car outside the neurology office for a long time after that appointment. I have a habit now of sitting in parking lots and letting things settle, which I didn't used to do. I used to move quickly through difficult information. Now I sit with it until it becomes the shape it actually is, rather than the shape I'm afraid it might be. The shape this was. My son had not failed me out of business or thoughtlessness, or the ordinary blind spots of people who are caught up in their own lives. He had failed me deliberately, and then hidden the failure behind a story about my preferences. And in doing so, he had also robbed me of every person in my extended family who would have shown up if they'd known. Faye would have come. She'd said so, voice cracking slightly, sitting next to me in a neurology waiting room. I believe her. I thought about what to do with this information for 10 days. I am methodical by nature, and this required more method than anything I could remember facing. And then I wrote a letter. Not a text. A letter. Actual paper, actual envelope, actual stamps. I wrote one to Faye, one to Derek's aunt and uncle on Ray's side, one to my own sister Pam in Cincinnati, and one to my cousin Ruthie, who sends me a Christmas card every year and who came to Ray's funeral and held my hand through the whole graveside service. I didn't send a letter to Derek's friends or his colleagues or anyone in Christie's family, just the people who were mine, the ones Derek had shielded from the truth about what had happened. The letter was 4 paragraphs. I told them I'd had a stroke in November. I told them the dates I'd been in the hospital. I told them I had been told, through a recent conversation with Faye, that they'd been informed I'd requested privacy, and that I wanted to clarify for the record that I had made no such request. I said I was not writing to create conflict or to assign blame. I said I was writing because I had spent 8 days in a hospital bed wondering why no one came, and now that I understood why, I felt the people who cared about me deserved to know the truth. I said I was doing well and that my recovery was ongoing, and that I was grateful for anyone who had thought of me during that time. I didn't mention Derek by name. I didn't have to. What happened after those letters arrived was something I sat at a careful distance from. Faye called me, twice. She was quiet both times in the way of someone who has said a great deal to other people, and is now choosing her words with me very carefully. She said she hoped I was okay. She said she'd talked to some people. She said Derek had called her, which I had expected, and that the conversation had apparently not gone particularly smoothly for him, which I had also expected. Ruthie drove 4 hours to have lunch with me, and did not mention the letters. Or Derek once, just brought me a lemon cake she'd made from scratch and talked to me for 3 hours about her garden, and her new dog, and a book she'd loved, and it was the most normal I'd felt since November. Pam flew in for a weekend. She slept in my guest room and we watched old movies, and she rubbed my right hand every evening because she'd read somewhere that massage helped with post-stroke nerve recovery and she wanted to try. She didn't ask me to explain or justify or revisit any of it. She just showed up, which was, of course, the whole point. Derek called 2 weeks after the letters. I picked up. "Mom," he said, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard in it since he was very young and had broken something and knew I was going to find out. I think we need to talk about some things." "Okay," I said. A long pause. Aunt Faye called me, and Uncle Gerald, and apparently Ruthie said some things at a family thing that He stopped. "Why didn't you just call me? If you were upset, why didn't you tell me?" I let that question breathe for a moment. "Derek," I said, "I called you from the ambulance." Silence. "I called you and I told you I was scared, and you told me to keep you updated." "I didn't." "Mom, I didn't understand how serious." "I know you didn't ask," I said. "That's the thing. You didn't ask for 8 days. You sent 2 texts, you went to a wine festival, and then you came with a balloon and asked about patio furniture. And when the family offered to be there for me, you told them I'd asked for privacy, which I never said." "Derek, I never said that." He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller. I didn't think of it as. I thought you seemed okay in the texts. You thought what was convenient," I said. "It wasn't cruel. It was just accurate. You thought the easiest version of this situation, and you built a story around it so that nobody would look too closely. I understand why you did it. I'm not sure I'll ever fully understand it the way I'd need to forgive it. I understand the mechanics of it." Another long silence. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "I want you to understand what actually happened," I said. "Not your version of it, which protected you. The real version, which is that I needed you, and you weren't there, and that cost me something that doesn't have a straightforward tag. I'm not asking you to have a perfectly calibrated response right now. I'm asking you to sit with that and let it be true." He didn't respond right away. I heard him breathing. I heard distantly the sound of his house. Christy's voice somewhere in the background, a child's feet on a wood floor. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said finally. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No," I said. "It doesn't, but it's a place to start. I have not been to Derek and Christy's house since November. Derek has been to mine twice. Once in February, once in March, both times without Christy, both times sitting at my kitchen table with coffee and a kind of careful attention that is new in him and that I'm watching. I don't know yet what it means. I'm not rushing toward a conclusion. The party didn't happen. Not at my house anyway. I heard through Faye that they'd booked a room at a restaurant in town. Smaller than originally planned. No vendor coordination required. I was not invited, which I noted and which I think was Derek making a kind of admission through absence. Maisie called me last month, from Derek's phone, to tell me about a project she'd done at school on monarch butterflies and to ask if I'd seen any in my garden. I told her I hadn't but that I'd been watching for them since she mentioned it. We talked for 11 minutes. She said at the end, "Grandma, are you coming over soon?" And I said, "I hope so, sweetheart," which was true. "I do hope so," said Agnes, and I have coffee 3 times a week now instead of 1. She doesn't ask me about Derek. She asks me about my hand, my sleep, whether I've tried the new bakery on Clement Street. She shows up. It still amazes me, the simple specific weight of that. That someone can just show up, without drama or scorekeeping, or a favor that needs to be repaid. And that this turns out to be the most valuable thing one person can offer another. I think about the ambulance sometimes. The feeling of the floor coming up. And then the strange ceiling of my own kitchen. And then the strange ceiling of a different place entirely. I think about those first hours when I still didn't know what kind of damage we were dealing with, when stroke was still a word landing rather than a word I'd already absorbed. In all those hours, one person held my hand. She returned my borrowed hedge trimmer with a bow and oatmeal cookies. She wrote down what Derek said so that she could tell me accurately later. She heated her casserole at 350. If the people who are supposed to love you only show up when they need something, and the people with no obligation to you show up with crossword books and casseroles and 4-hour lunch drives, what does that tell you about where love actually lives? I think you already know the answer. I just needed a Wednesday morning and a kitchen floor to learn it properly. This has been Selina Payback. New stories every single day.